It is a story whispered across millennia, a name synonymous with both breathtaking ambition and catastrophic failure. Icarus, the boy who dared to touch the heavens. His tale is not merely a myth of wax and feathers, but a profound exploration of human nature itself. It speaks to the inventor's genius, a father's love, and a son's untamable spirit. We are drawn to his audacity, the sheer courage to escape a terrestrial prison by conquering the sky. Yet, his flight serves as the ultimate cautionary tale, a timeless warning against the intoxicating allure of hubris. When does ambition become arrogance? When does freedom turn into recklessness? The story of Icarus forces us to look inward, to question the limits of our own aspirations, and to understand the delicate balance between reaching for the sun and being consumed by its fire. His fall from the sky echoes through history, a permanent reminder of a price too high to pay. On the magnificent island of Crete, the cradle of Minoan civilization, King Minos reigned with absolute authority. His palace at Knossos was a wonder of the ancient world, a sprawling complex of vibrant frescoes, advanced plumbing, and grand courtyards that spoke of immense wealth and power. Cretan ships dominated the Aegean Sea, their sails a symbol of a trade empire that stretched from the shores of Anatolia to the mainland of Greece. To the outside world, Crete was a beacon of prosperity and cultural achievement. But within the labyrinthine corridors of the palace, and deep within the heart of the king himself, lay a dark and terrible secret, a living testament to a moment of divine defiance. The story begins not with a man, but with a monster. Years earlier, to secure his claim to the throne, Minos had prayed to Poseidon, the god of the sea, to send a sign of his favor. He vowed to sacrifice whatever emerged from the waves. Poseidon answered, sending forth a spectacular white bull, a creature of breathtaking beauty and power. But Minos, captivated by the animal's perfection, broke his oath. He hid the divine bull among his own herds and sacrificed a lesser one in its place. The gods do not suffer such hubris lightly. As punishment, Poseidon afflicted Minos' wife, Queen Pasiphae, with an unnatural desire for the bull. The result of this cursed union was a creature of profound horror, a being with the body of a man and the head of a bull. It was named the Minotaur. This monstrous offspring became the king's greatest shame, a symbol of his broken promise and the gods' enduring wrath. Hidden from public view, the creature grew strong and ferocious. To contain it and to feed its unnatural appetite, Minos devised a cruel tribute. He used his naval supremacy to subjugate the burgeoning city of Athens, demanding a periodic offering, 7 of the city's finest young men and 7 of its most courageous young women. These 14 souls were sent to Crete, not as slaves or servants, but as sacrifices, destined to be lost in the darkness, to face the beast that haunted the king's conscience. This tribute was more than just a means of containing a monster. It was a brutal instrument of political control, a constant, horrifying reminder to all of Crete's dominance and the price of defiance. The shadow of the Minotaur thus fell over the entire Aegean, a tale whispered in fear from port to port. King Minos had his power, but he had no peace. He needed a permanent solution, a prison from which his monstrous secret could never escape. He needed a genius. From the intellectually fertile city of Athens came a man whose name was synonymous with genius, Daedalus. He was not a king or a warrior, but an inventor, an architect, and an artist of such extraordinary skill that his creations were said to be alive. He fashioned statues that could move, tools of unparalleled precision, and structures that defied the known laws of engineering. His fame was immense, his talent a source of both pride and envy in his homeland. But genius can be a solitary and jealous force. Daedalus had a young nephew, Talos, who was his apprentice. the boy showed a prodigious talent that threatened to eclipse even his masters. It was Talos who, inspired by the jawbone of a snake, invented the saw. It was Talos who created the potter's wheel. In the boy's burgeoning brilliance, Daedalus saw not a legacy, but a rival. Overcome by a moment of professional jealousy and fear, he committed a terrible act. On a visit to the Acropolis, he led the boy to the edge, and Talos fell to his end. The crime did not go unnoticed. Charged by the Athenian court, Daedalus was forced to flee the city he had so brilliantly adorned. He became an exile, a man without a home, his reputation forever stained. With his young son, Icarus, he journeyed across the sea, eventually finding refuge on the island of Crete. Here, his fame had preceded him. King Minos, a ruler who appreciated skill and recognized its utility, welcomed the Athenian inventor with open arms. He saw in Daedalus not a fugitive, but the perfect instrument to solve his most pressing problem. Daedalus was given a grand workshop, unlimited resources, and the king's personal patronage. He quickly became the chief craftsman of the Cretan court, creating intricate toys for the royal children, designing ceremonial halls, and devising clever contraptions that amazed and delighted the Minoan elite. He was celebrated, honored, and for a time he may have believed he had found a new home, a new life far from the shadows of his past. He enjoyed the king's favor and the comforts of the palace, his mind constantly at work, his hands always creating. But the king's patronage came with a price. Daedalus was about to receive a commission that would demand every ounce of his ingenuity, a project that would bind him inextricably to the dark secret of the house of Minos and seal his own fate. The summons from King Minos was not for a new automaton or a grand hall, but for a task of immense gravity and secrecy. The king laid bare his shame, the story of the Minotaur, and presented Daedalus with an unprecedented architectural challenge: to build a prison so complex, so ingeniously confusing, that once inside, no living thing could ever find its way out. It was to be a structure that could hold a monster forever. Daedalus, bound by the debt of hospitality, and perhaps intrigued by the sheer impossibility of the task, accepted. He set to work on what would become his most famous and most fateful creation, the Labyrinth. This was no simple maze of high hedges. It was a sprawling, multi-leveled structure of stone, a masterpiece of psychological warfare rendered in architecture. Daedalus poured all his knowledge of mathematics, perspective, and human perception into its design. He created a disorienting network of winding passages that turned back on themselves, halls that looked identical but led to different destinations, and staircases that seemed to ascend and descend simultaneously. The very air within the labyrinth was designed to foster confusion and a sense of hopelessness. There were no landmarks, no straight lines to follow, only an endless series of choices, each one leading deeper into the puzzle. The construction was carried out under the strictest secrecy, deep beneath the palace of Knossos. The workers who built it were led through confusing paths themselves, ensuring none but Daedalus could ever know the complete design. He alone held the key, the one true path through the bewildering corridors to the center and back out again. When the final stone was laid, the structure was complete. It was a monument to human ingenuity and a tomb for a divine mistake. The Minotaur was lured into its new home, its roars echoing through the twisting passages before being swallowed by the stone. King Minos finally had a solution. His secret was contained, buried in the heart of a puzzle of Daedalus's making. The Athenian tributes could now be sent directly into the labyrinth's entrance, their fate sealed. The inventor had succeeded beyond the king's wildest dreams, but in his success, Daedalus had unknowingly forged his own chains. He had solved the king's problem, but in doing so, he had become the single greatest threat to the king's security. He was the man who knew the secret of the monster, and, more importantly, the secret of its prison. The master of the labyrinth was about to discover he could not leave it. With the labyrinth finished and the Minotaur secured within its depths, Daedalus anticipated his reward. He had served the king, solved his most terrible problem, and now he longed to return to his homeland of Athens. He approached King Minos to request leave for himself and his son, Icarus. The king smiled, praised his genius, and showered him with more gifts of gold and honor. But the permission to leave was never granted. Minos, a ruler defined by his control, could not allow the one man who knew the labyrinth's secret to depart. The inventor's knowledge was a weapon that, in the hands of Crete's enemies like Athens, could be devastating. Daedalus, the celebrated craftsman, slowly came to a chilling realization. His status had changed from honored guest to invaluable prisoner. The entire island of Crete became their cage, a beautiful, luxurious, gilded cage. They lived in splendor within the palace walls, wanting for nothing material. Daedalus was still commissioned to create wonders, and Icarus grew from a boy into a young man, knowing only the sun-drenched shores of the island. He played in the royal courts, oblivious to the fact that the sparkling sea surrounding his home was a barrier, not a gateway. For Icarus, Crete was the whole world. For Daedalus, it was a constant, painful reminder of his exile and his confinement. He watched his son grow up as a Cretan, far from the culture and heritage of Athens that he so desperately missed. A silent tension grew between the inventor and the king. It was a chess match of wills, played out in polite conversation and watchful glances. Minos was determined to keep his asset, and Daedalus was determined to reclaim his freedom. The inventor saw the king's guards at every port, his ships patrolling every sea lane. Escape by conventional means was utterly impossible. The king controlled the land. The king controlled the water. Every day, Daedalus would gaze out at the vast expanse of the Aegean, his brilliant mind, which had once solved impossible problems for a king, now turning inward. It began to work on the most personal and desperate problem of his life: how to escape the inescapable. If land and sea were barred to him, his eyes and his intellect began to drift toward the one realm Minos did not command. He started looking to the sky. The realization that King Minos would never grant them their freedom settled upon Daedalus not with rage, but with a quiet, steely resolve. Trapped by a paranoid monarch, the inventor's mind conceived of an escape plan so audacious, so contrary to the laws of nature, that it belonged to the realm of myth itself. He would not sail or walk away from Crete. He would fly. The project became his secret obsession. By day, he performed his duties for the court, designing and building as the king commanded. But by night, in the privacy of his secluded workshop, he began his true life's work. His plan required a meticulous study of the one creature that had mastered the sky, the bird. He spent countless hours observing gulls as they soared on the sea winds, noting the curve of their wings, the way they angled their feathers to catch the currents. He began to collect his materials in secret. He tasked his son, Icarus, with gathering fallen feathers along the coastline, presenting it as a simple game. Servants were asked for scraps of linen thread and blocks of beeswax, innocuous requests for a craftsman's workshop. Piece by piece, feather by feather, he assembled the impossible. He laid out the feathers in an overlapping pattern, starting with the smallest and ending with the longest, mimicking the structure of a natural wing. He bound them together at their base with the linen thread and secured the whole miraculous construction with soft beeswax. He built a light but sturdy wooden frame to which the feathers were attached, with harnesses of leather to strap onto the arms and torso. 2 pairs were made, one large and powerful for his own frame, and a smaller, lighter set for Icarus. The young man, who had grown up in the shadow of his father's genius, was captivated. To him, this was the ultimate invention, a wondrous game. He played with the feathers, laughing as he tried to catch them in the air, not fully comprehending the life-or-death gamble they represented. Daedalus began to instruct his son, teaching him to balance, to flap his arms in a steady rhythm, to feel the air and work with it, not against it. The workshop, once a place of service to a king, became a sanctuary of hope, a laboratory for the dream of freedom. Finally, the day came. The wings were finished. They were not divine artifacts, but masterpieces of human ingenuity, born from desperation and a father's love. On a remote cliff, far from the watchful eyes of the palace guards, they prepared to leave their gilded cage. As Daedalus fitted the wings to his son's back, he gave him a final, urgent warning. "Fly a middle course, my son. Do not go too low, for the sea spray will dampen the feathers, and do not fly too high, for the sun's fire will melt the wax." The dream was now a fragile reality, suspended on feathers and hope, between the hostile sea and the boundless tempting sky. On the island of Crete, Daedalus, the master architect from Athens, lived in a cage of his own design. He was the celebrated genius behind the great Labyrinth, a marvel of engineering that housed the fearsome Minotaur. For this, King Minos had showered him with wealth and honors, but these accolades were merely the golden bars of a luxurious prison. The king, possessive of Daedalus's singular talent, would never permit him to leave. Every day, the inventor would gaze out at the vast, shimmering sea, a beautiful and impassable barrier. Minos's fleet, the most powerful in the Aegean, patrolled the waters relentlessly. Every port was watched, every ship inspected. Escape by sea was a fantasy. His son, Icarus, born on the island, felt the confinement even more acutely. He listened to his father's stories of Athens, a city of freedom and intellect he had never seen, and a deep yearning for this ancestral home grew within him. The boy was restless, his youthful energy chafing against the island's shores. The palace was a place of intrigue and unspoken threats, and Daedalus knew their gilded status was precarious. The favor of a king could vanish as quickly as a morning mist. Desperation began to sharpen his inventive mind, forcing it beyond the known realms of architecture and mechanics. He watched the gulls and eagles, creatures that soared effortlessly above the king's domain. They came and went as they pleased, their freedom a stark mockery of his own captivity. An idea, wild and seemingly impossible, began to form. It started as a whisper in a secluded chamber, a secret shared between father and son. "Minos controls the land and the sea," Daedalus murmured to Icarus one evening, "but he does not command the air." The boy's eyes widened, not with fear, but with a spark of adventurous excitement. The impossible idea had found fertile ground. Their covert work began. They collected feathers dropped by seabirds in the palace gardens and along the cliffs. They gathered scraps of linen and procured blocks of beeswax from the royal kitchens, all under the guise of other projects. Every feather collected, every ball of thread hidden, was a small act of rebellion, a gamble against the absolute power of the king. Discovery would not lead to exile. It would lead to a terrible end within the very labyrinth Daedalus had built. The whispers continued, evolving from a desperate wish into a concrete, audacious plan. In a forgotten storeroom high in the palace, shielded from the prying eyes of royal guards, the great work commenced. The chamber became a secret sanctuary of creation, filled with the scent of melted beeswax and the soft rustle of 1,000 feathers. Here, Daedalus the architect transformed into Daedalus, the aeronautical pioneer. This was a challenge unlike any he had faced. He was not shaping stone or wood to remain fixed to the earth. He was attempting to craft a pathway through the sky. The process was a masterpiece of meticulous labor. He first constructed 2 light but sturdy frames from flexible wood, carefully bent and shaped to mimic the skeletal structure of a great bird's wing. For months, he had studied the flight of eagles, noting the curve of their wingspan and the way they angled their feathers to catch the currents of the air. Icarus became his apprentice in this forbidden art. The boy's nimble fingers proved adept at sorting the feathers into piles based on size, shape, and strength. The long, rigid primary feathers were for the outer edges, designed to provide thrust and control. The smaller, softer down feathers were layered on the inside, creating a dense surface to capture the wind. With lengths of strong linen thread, they painstakingly bound the quill of each feather to the wooden frame, one overlapping the next, in a precise interlocking pattern that was both strong and flexible. As Icarus worked, he would hold the half-formed wings, imagining the feeling of air beneath them. To him, this was not just an escape plan, it was the birth of a miracle. The final, critical element was the beeswax. Daedalus melted it over a small, concealed brazier, creating a fragrant, golden liquid. This was the glue that would bind their creation together, securing every thread and feather in place. He applied the wax with care, ensuring a complete seal that was both powerful and light. Slowly, over many weeks of clandestine labor, 2 magnificent pairs of wings took shape on the dusty floor. One was large and powerful for a man. The other was smaller, more agile for a boy. They were no longer just a collection of wood, feathers, and wax. They were tangible instruments of hope, a testament to an unyielding desire for freedom. The construction was complete. The impossible had been made real. The night before their departure was sleepless. The finished wings rested in the shadows of the workshop, their forms both beautiful and menacing. As the first light of dawn crept through a high window, Daedalus knew the time had come. The air was thick with tension, a mixture of hope and a father's profound fear. He turned to Icarus, whose face was flush with excitement, the gravity of their undertaking lost in the thrill of the impending adventure. Daedalus gently took the smaller set of wings and began to fit them to his son's shoulders. As he fastened the leather straps across Icarus's chest and arms, his movements were slow and deliberate. Each buckle he secured, each knot he tightened, was a silent prayer. He was not just attaching wings, he was entrusting his son's life to this fragile contraption of his own making. When the wings were secure, he placed his hands on Icarus's shoulders, forcing the boy to meet his serious gaze. The inventor's voice was low and urgent, stripped of all artifice. This was not a king's architect speaking, but a father facing the potential loss of his child. "Listen to me, Icarus," he began, his words a solemn command. "We must fly a middle course. Our safety lies in balance." He pointed downwards, towards the floor that represented the sea. "If you fly too low, the ocean's spray and the damp sea mist will soak the feathers. They will become heavy with water, and you will be pulled down into the waves." His gaze then shifted upwards, towards the ceiling that represented the sun. "But if you fly too high, in your excitement, the fierce heat of the sun will soften the wax that holds your wings together. The feathers will fall away, and you will have nothing to hold you aloft." He repeated the instruction, desperate to etch it into his son's memory. "Stay in the middle path. Follow me closely. Do not be tempted to forge your own way. Watch my flight, and do exactly as I do." Icarus nodded, his youthful confidence making him feel invincible. He heard the words, but he could not feel the weight of his father's fear. Daedalus saw the distant look in his son's eyes, and his heart grew heavy. He pulled the boy into a final, fierce embrace, a desperate, silent plea for obedience before they faced the sky. They made their way to a remote, wind-swept promontory on the southern coast of Crete. Far below, the waves of the Aegean crashed against the rocks in a relentless rhythm. The palace of Minos was a distant shape, a symbol of the life they were leaving behind. This cliff was their doorway to the sky, their launch pad to freedom. The wind was strong, a powerful updraft that whistled past their ears. It was a good sign, a force that could aid their ascent, but it was also a wild, untamable power that demanded respect. Daedalus stood at the precipice, his larger wings strapped securely to his back. He flexed them, feeling their weight and balance, testing their resistance against the gusts of wind. For all his genius, he was a creature of the earth. His hands were skilled at shaping stone and wood, not commanding the air. A tremor of primal fear ran through him. This was the ultimate unknown. He looked at Icarus. The boy showed no such hesitation. His eyes were wide with wonder, fixed on the endless expanse of blue before them. For him, this was the greatest moment of his young life. The fear that gripped his father was absent, replaced by an intoxicating blend of adrenaline and anticipation. He saw the wings not as a precarious tool for escape, but as a gift of liberation, a means to touch the heavens. Daedalus took a deep breath, the salty air filling his lungs. He gave his son one last look, conveying a lifetime of instruction and love in a single, silent glance. He demonstrated the motion they had practiced in the workshop, a broad, steady flapping, a powerful downstroke to catch the air. "Remember the middle path, my son," he shouted over the wind. "Follow me." There could be no more delay. Their absence would soon be discovered. The window of opportunity was closing. This was the moment of truth, the point of no return where the theory of his workshop had to withstand the unforgiving laws of nature. With a final, resolute look at the sky, Daedalus gathered all his courage. He took 3 running steps towards the edge of the world. Then, with a powerful push from his legs, he launched himself into the void. For a terrifying second, he fell. The cliff rushed away above him, the sea lunged up to meet him. Then, instinct and design took over. He beat his wings, once, twice. They caught the air, and his fall slowed, stabilized, and then, miraculously, transformed into ascent. He was flying. Watching his father soar, Icarus felt a surge of exhilaration that banished any lingering fear. He ran to the cliff's edge and leaped without a moment's hesitation. The wind snatched him, a dizzying drop followed by the incredible sensation of his wings catching the air. A clumsy, frantic flapping soon gave way to a more confident, rhythmic beat. He was airborne. He was free. The initial moments were pure, unadulterated bliss. He let out a joyous shout that was swept away by the wind. The world transformed beneath him. The island of Crete, his entire world for his whole life, shrank into a patch of green and brown. The mighty palace of Minos became a child's toy. He saw fishermen in their boats, their faces turned up to the sky in disbelief, pointing at the 2 impossible figures. A shepherd on a distant hill stood frozen, his flock forgotten, as he witnessed what could only be the passage of gods. Icarus was no longer the son of a captive, the boy confined to an island prison. He was a conqueror of the sky, a master of a realm forbidden to mortals. The feeling was intoxicating, a potent surge of power he had never known. He swooped and climbed, testing the limits of his new body. He dove towards the waves, pulling up just in time, feeling the cool spray on his face. He banked and turned, laughing as he chased seabirds who scattered before him. Ahead, Daedalus flew a steady, disciplined course, a dark shape against the bright sky. He maintained a constant altitude, his wing beats economical and strong. He repeatedly glanced back, calling out to Icarus, reminding him of the path, of the dangers. But his voice was a faint sound against the rush of the wind and the triumphant beat of Icarus's own heart. They had done it. They had escaped the inescapable Labyrinth. They had outwitted the most powerful king in the Aegean. They were achieving a feat that belonged in the stories of heroes and deities. The success of the flight, the sheer joy of it, began to work a dangerous change in the boy's mind. The freedom he had craved was now his, and it felt limitless. The cautious, middle path his father followed seemed dull, pedestrian. His eyes drifted from his father's guiding form, down to the vast sea, and then up, towards the glorious blazing sun. It hung in the sky like a golden prize, a destination calling to him, daring him to come closer. The first moments were pure disbelief. The laws of the earth, the unyielding pull of gravity that had defined every second of his existence, were suddenly rendered obsolete. Icarus pushed off from the cliffside, a clumsy, hesitant flap of his new appendages, and then he was airborne. The shock gave way to a wave of pure, unadulterated ecstasy. He was flying. The wind, once a force to be endured, was now his partner, a current to be ridden, a symphony he could conduct with the slightest tilt of a feather. Below him, the island of Crete, his lifelong prison, began to shrink. The labyrinth, the seat of his confinement, became an insignificant geometric pattern on the landscape. The world transformed into a living map of turquoise seas and emerald islands. His father, Daedalus, flew ahead, a steady, disciplined presence. His movements were economical, his path direct, a straight line between captivity and freedom. For a time, Icarus followed, mimicking his father's practiced strokes, marveling at the genius that had conceived this impossible escape. But the boy's spirit was not his father's. Daedalus sought mere transit, a means to an end. Icarus discovered something else entirely in the vast emptiness of the sky, a playground. He began to experiment, to deviate from the rigid path. He swooped low, his feet nearly skimming the white caps of the waves, sending spray into the air. He chased gulls, laughing as they scattered before him, this strange new brother of the air. He soared upwards in a great arc, feeling the power in his shoulders, the strength of the wings that had become a part of him. This was not just freedom from a physical prison, it was a liberation of the soul. On the ground, he was the son of a captive artisan, subject to the whims of a king. But here, in the boundless dome of the sky, he was subject to nothing. He was a master of his own altitude, the king of his own vertical kingdom. The warnings his father had given him in the dusty workshop, "Do not fly too low, nor too high," seemed like the cautious words of an old man who could not comprehend the sheer glory of the moment. Caution belonged to the world of stone walls and shadowed corridors. The sky was a realm of pure potential, a place where such earthly rules felt like ancient, irrelevant superstitions. The sun, a distant, benevolent warmth on his back, seemed to beckon him, to approve of his joyous ascent. The intoxication was complete, a potent mixture of adrenaline, rebellion, and the dawning, dangerous belief that he was no longer just a boy, but a god. The middle path, the via media prescribed by his father, began to feel like a compromise, a limitation on this newfound power. It was the path of safety, of moderation, but Icarus's heart now beat with the rhythm of ambition. He watched Daedalus, a dark shape maintaining a steady altitude, and a new impulse took hold, not of disobedience, but of transcendence. Why settle for the middle when the heavens themselves were within reach? He tilted his wings, not down towards the sea, but up, decisively, towards the blinding source of all light. The ascent began. It was a conscious choice, a deliberate pivot from the known to the unknown. The air grew cooler for a moment, thinner. The rhythmic whoosh of his wings was the only sound in a profound, crystalline silence. The world below continued to recede, its details blurring into a tapestry of abstract color. The ships on the sea were now tiny, crawling specks. The concerns of men, the politics of kings, and the confines of islands seemed utterly insignificant from this vantage point. Daedalus's shouts, frantic and desperate, were carried away by the wind, unheard or perhaps willfully ignored. Icarus was in a state of euphoric focus. The sun was no longer a star in the sky. It was a destination. It was a golden chariot, a celestial throne, the ultimate validation of his flight. In his mind, he was not defying his father. He was completing his father's work. Daedalus had provided the means, but he, Icarus, would provide the purpose. The purpose was not merely to escape, but to achieve, to touch the sublime. This is the core of hubris, the conviction that one's own potential is limitless, that the warnings of predecessors are born of fear, not wisdom. He felt the ingenuity of his father's design flowing through him, and he believed it made him invincible. The flawlessly engineered wings, a marvel of human intellect, gave him the confidence to challenge a divine boundary. He was climbing a ladder of his own ambition, each flap of his wings taking him further from the realm of mortals and closer to the domain of the gods. He rose above the clouds, bursting through the white veil into a sky of impossible, deepening blue. He was alone now, in a place no human had ever been. And ahead, his goal burned, a sphere of incandescent gold, seeming to welcome him into its fiery heart. From his steady course, Daedalus turned and saw it. His son was no longer behind him or beside him. He was a rising speck, a silhouette against the blinding glare of the noon sun. A cold dread, heavier than any stone in the labyrinth, settled in the inventor's heart. He cried out his son's name, the sound a pathetic plea against the immense indifference of the sky. "Icarus, turn back! The path! Remember the path!" But his voice was a mere whisper, swallowed by the vastness. The bond between them, forged in the shared secrecy of the workshop, was stretching across an ever-widening vertical chasm. Down there, surrounded by tools, wax, and feathers, they had been partners. Daedalus had passed on his knowledge, his craft, and his urgent life-or-death instructions. Icarus had listened, his eyes wide with admiration, and he had promised. He had promised to heed the warnings, to respect the delicate balance upon which their lives now depended. That promise, once a solemn vow, was now dissolving in the thin, high-altitude air. For Icarus, the flight had ceased to be a shared journey of escape. It had become a solo performance, a personal quest for glory. He was deaf to everything but the song of his own soaring heart. He had forgotten that his wings were not his own creation. They were a gift, a loan from his father's genius, and they came with conditions. To break the conditions was to break the gift itself. This moment represents a timeless, tragic schism between generations. Daedalus, the voice of experience, understood the hidden dangers, the lethal physics of their situation. He knew that the same sun which gave them light and direction was also their greatest threat. Icarus, embodying the fiery spirit of youth, saw only the opportunity, the beauty, the challenge. He saw the sun not as a danger, but as a prize. The father's caution seemed like pessimism. The son's ambition felt like destiny. The tragedy was not just in the act of flying too high, but in the forgetting of the promise, the severing of the trust that was the invisible thread holding their fragile family together. Daedalus could only watch, a helpless architect observing the beautiful, terrible, and inevitable collapse of his most precious creation. The warmth that had been so pleasant on his ascent began to change. It was no longer a gentle caress, but a pervasive, insistent heat that seemed to penetrate the feathers and warm the very framework of the wings. Icarus, lost in his divine proximity to the sun, barely noticed at first. But then, a strange, sweet scent reached him, the smell of honey and melting beeswax. It was the scent of the workshop, a scent of creation. But here, in the apex of the sky, it was an omen of deconstruction. He glanced at his shoulder and saw it, a single, glistening golden bead of wax. Then another. The perfect, rigid structure of the wings was beginning to soften. A single, small feather from the wing's edge detached, catching the air for a moment, before beginning its long, silent spiral back towards the distant sea. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty pierced his euphoria. He tried to flap harder, to climb even higher, as if he could outfly the consequence that was now literally melting on his back. But the sun's embrace was relentless. It was not a violent attack, but a slow, methodical undoing. The very source of power he had sought was now the agent of his ruin. The golden light he had revered was dismantling his ambition, one feather at a time. The intricate lattice of his father's design, built to withstand the wind, was never meant to endure this celestial fire. More feathers loosened, breaking free not in a dramatic burst, but in a quiet, steady cascade. They danced in his wake, a testament to his fleeting glory. The powerful, rhythmic strokes that had carried him so high became less effective. There was a looseness, a troubling lack of resistance against the air. The feeling of lift, that magical buoyancy that had made him feel like a god, began to falter. The wings were no longer the proud, powerful extensions of his body. They were becoming limp, failing appendages. The ascent stopped. For a heart-stopping moment, he hung there, suspended between the heavens and the sea, before the undeniable, ancient law of gravity reasserted its claim. The golden embrace was complete. He had touched the sun, and its heat was now sending him back to the earth. Daedalus never took his eyes off the sky, his own flight now a mechanical, joyless act. He watched the point of light that was his sun, praying he would turn back. But the point did not descend. It simply vanished. One moment it was there, a defiant spark against the sun, and the next, it was gone. Panic seized him. He cried out again, "Icarus, Icarus, where are you?" The only answer was the lonely whistle of the wind through his own wings. Then he saw them. A flurry of feathers, drifting lazily down from the heights, catching the sun like tragic snowflakes. And then he saw a shape, small and indistinct, plummeting in a silent, terrible arc. It was a fall without a scream, a descent so swift and absolute that it seemed to tear a hole in the fabric of the world. The genius of Daedalus, the mind that could solve the riddle of the labyrinth and invent flight itself, completely unraveled. His creation, his masterpiece, had become the instrument of his deepest sorrow. This was a prison far worse than the one Minos had built. It was a prison of memory, of guilt, of a father's ultimate failure to protect his child. He flew frantically towards the area where his son had vanished, his eyes scanning the endless, indifferent surface of the water. He saw nothing but the glint of the sun on the waves. He circled for hours, his cries growing hoarse, until he finally saw them, feathers floating on the water and remnants of the wax. He landed on a nearby island, later to be named Icaria in his son's memory. There, the waves delivered the body of his boy. The great inventor, the man who could craft automatons and trick kings, knelt on the shore and performed the simple, heartbreaking task of a father burying his child. He had flown to freedom, but had arrived in desolation. He had given his son the sky, and the sky had taken him. The tragedy of Icarus is not just about a boy's hubris, it is about a father's grief. Daedalus would live on, but his spirit would remain forever chained to that single, terrible moment, a genius left to contemplate the devastating cost of flying too close to the sun. The air thinned, growing crisp and cool as Icarus ascended. Below him, the world became a tapestry of blues and greens, a map of islands and sea that he had only ever seen from the ground. The warnings of his father, Daedalus, once so resonant in the confines of the labyrinth, now seemed like distant echoes from another life. Why had he been so cautious? This was not danger. This was freedom. This was divinity. The rhythmic beat of his wings was the pulse of a new kind of existence, one unbound by earthly constraints. He was no longer the son of a captive artisan. He was a master of the sky, a companion to the birds, a challenger to the sun itself. The feeling was pure exhilaration, an intoxicating rush of power that filled every fiber of his being. He laughed, a sound snatched away by the wind, and angled his wings higher. He would not just escape, he would triumph. He would reach the heavens and touch the fiery chariot of Helios. It was the ultimate act of defiance against the king who had imprisoned them and the gods who ruled from above. The sun, once a distant beacon, now felt like a warm, welcoming presence. Its golden rays bathed him, feeling less like a threat and more like an embrace. He felt its heat on his skin, a pleasant warmth that soon intensified. A strange, sweet scent, like melting honey, reached his nose. He dismissed it, too caught in the rapture of his ascent. But then he felt a subtle shift, a looseness in the feathers near his shoulders. A single downy plume detached, dancing in the air, before beginning its long, slow spiral back to the sea. He barely noticed. Another followed, then a small cluster. The magnificent architecture of his wings, so meticulously crafted by his father, was beginning to fail. The sun's heat was not a caress, but a relentless assault, softening the fragrant wax that held his freedom together. The rhythmic beat of his wings became uneven, a flutter, a stutter. The intoxicating confidence that had propelled him upward began to curdle into a cold knot of fear. He looked at his arms and saw the framework of the wings, once dense with feathers, now showing gaps. The wax ran in warm rivulets down his skin. He flapped his arms more frantically, a desperate, useless motion. The air no longer supported him. The ascent had stopped. For a terrifying, weightless moment, he hung suspended between the heavens and the earth. Then, gravity, the ancient law he had so gleefully defied, reasserted its claim. The fall began. Daedalus flew at a steady, prudent altitude, the one he had prescribed. He was a creature of calculation and control. Every flap of his wings was measured, every gust of wind anticipated. He glanced back, expecting to see his son trailing behind him, a mirror of his own careful flight. But the sky behind him was empty. A prickle of unease disturbed his focused calm. He called out, "Icarus!" His voice was thin, easily consumed by the vastness of the sky and the rush of the wind past his ears. He called again, louder this time, his tone sharpened with an urgency that bordered on panic. "Icarus, where are you?" He banked, turning in a wide, searching circle, his eyes scanning the brilliant, empty expanse. There was nothing. The joy of their escape, the triumph of his own ingenuity, evaporated, replaced by a father's primal fear. Had he misjudged the winds? Had a strap come loose? He refused to let his mind entertain the worst possibility, the one born of his son's youthful impetuousness. He had warned him, pleaded with him to temper his excitement with caution. But he knew his son. He knew the boy's heart was filled with a fire that he, the careful architect, had never possessed. And so, he looked up. Against the blinding glare of the sun, he thought he saw a speck, a dark shape plummeting in a chaotic, uncontrolled descent. It was too far to be certain, too quick to comprehend. Then, his sharp eyes caught them. Small, white objects drifting gently down, catching the sunlight like scattered jewels. Feathers. His son's feathers. The sight struck him with the force of a physical blow. He understood instantly and completely. The wax had melted. The wings had failed. The boy had flown too high. A cry escaped his lips, a sound of pure anguish that had no words. He could do nothing. He was a master of creation, a man who could build labyrinths and fashion wings from scraps, but he was powerless to halt his own child's fall. He was trapped in the very sky that was supposed to be his liberation, forced to be a spectator to the catastrophic failure of his greatest creation and the loss of his only son. He watched, his heart fracturing, as the distant shape hit the water. There was no grand splash, just a small, insignificant disturbance on the surface of the immense, indifferent sea. The father, the genius, the escapee, could only circle helplessly above, his own wings feeling less like a marvel and more like a curse, a constant reminder of the invention that had led to this unbearable end. The flight was no longer an escape, it was a mournful procession. Daedalus descended, his wings heavy, his spirit crushed. He flew low over the waves, his gaze fixed on the area where his son had vanished. He searched for hours, his desperate calls swallowed by the sound of the surf. Finally, he saw him. The waves had carried the boy's body to the shore of a nearby island. Daedalus landed, his knees buckling on the sand. The wings, the symbol of his genius and his hubris, now felt like a grotesque burden. He unstrapped the contraption and let it fall, a useless pile of wood, twine, and feathers. Before him lay the tragic result of a dream sought too eagerly. The boy who had wanted to touch the sun now lay still upon the earth. All the knowledge of mechanics, all the architectural brilliance, all the creative power that had defined Daedalus's life was meaningless in this moment. He could build a maze to contain a monster, but he could not undo this. He was just a father, faced with the ultimate, irreversible loss. With heavy hands, he performed the final rites. He gathered stones to make a humble monument, a task far removed from the grand palaces and intricate devices he was accustomed to building. This was the most important structure he would ever create, and its purpose was steeped in failure. As he worked, he cursed his own cleverness. He cursed the skills that had given them the means to fly, but not the wisdom to survive. He named the island Icaria, a permanent testament to the son he had lost there. From that day forward, the stretch of the Aegean Sea that had claimed the boy would also bear his name, the Icarian Sea. It became a place on the map, a name whispered by sailors, a geographical feature forever entwined with a story of ambition and consequence. The tragedy did not just create a memory, it reshaped the world, branding the landscape with a father's sorrow. The sea, vast and eternal, became a monument far grander than any Daedalus could build. It serves as a constant, shimmering reminder that for every ascent into the heavens, the earth and its immutable laws wait below. For Daedalus, the brilliant inventor, his final landing was not in a new kingdom of freedom, but on a desolate shore of regret, forever bound to the sea that held his son's name. The story of Icarus did not end on the shores of Icaria. It was only the beginning of its journey through human culture, a myth so potent it would be retold and reinterpreted for millennia. One of its most enduring early tellings comes from the Roman poet Ovid in his masterwork, Metamorphoses. Ovid captures the drama of the event, describing a fisherman, a shepherd, and a plowman looking up in astonishment at the flying pair, mistaking them for gods. This detail adds a layer of public spectacle to the private tragedy, highlighting the awe-inspiring nature of their flight just before its disastrous conclusion. Ovid's account solidified the myth as a cornerstone of Western literature, a powerful narrative of parental warning and youthful defiance. Centuries later, the story found one of its most famous and enigmatic expressions in the world of art. The 16th century painting, Landscape with the Fall of Icarus, traditionally attributed to Peter Bruegel the Elder, offers a startlingly different perspective. Here, the fall of Icarus is not the central event. Instead, it is a minor detail in a sprawling, indifferent landscape. A farmer continues to plow his field, a shepherd gazes at the sky but not at the falling boy, and a ship sails calmly by. Icarus himself is just a pair of legs flailing in the water in the bottom right corner, almost unnoticeable. Bruegel's interpretation is a profound commentary on the nature of human events. It suggests that even the most dramatic personal tragedy goes largely unnoticed by the world, which continues its daily routines, unmoved. Life goes on. This theme was captured perfectly by the 20th century poet W. H. Auden in his poem Musée des Beaux-Arts, which reflects on Bruegel's painting, noting how suffering happens while someone else is opening a window or just walking dully along. From ancient verse to Renaissance canvases and modern poetry, the fall of Icarus has proven to be a remarkably flexible metaphor. It is simultaneously a story about the dangers of hubris, a celebration of daring ambition, a reflection on the conflict between generations, and a meditation on the world's indifference to individual fate. Each artist and writer who approaches the myth holds up a mirror not just to Icarus, but to their own time, exploring our eternal fascination with those who dare to fly, even if they are destined to fall. The myth of Icarus resonates so deeply not because it is an artifact of the ancient world, but because it is a story about us now. The fundamental tension between caution and ambition, between the wisdom of experience and the fire of youth, is a timeless human drama. In the 20th century, this ancient story was given a new name in the field of psychology, the Icarus complex. Coined to describe a personality type marked by excessive ambition, narcissism, and a fantasy of achievement, the term gives a clinical framework to the boy's tragic flaw. The Icarus complex describes the individual who soars on the wings of early success, whose ascent is so spectacular that they begin to believe they are exempt from the rules. They ignore the warnings of mentors and colleagues, the modern Daedaluses, convinced that their own brilliance is enough to defy any limitation. We see this archetype play out repeatedly in the modern world. In the corporate arena, a visionary chief executive officer might push a company to dazzling new heights through risky ventures, only to preside over its catastrophic collapse when the market turns or their gambles fail. In the world of technology, brilliant innovators create revolutionary tools that change society, sometimes becoming so enamored with their own creation that they fail to see its unforeseen negative consequences until it is too late. In politics, charismatic leaders can rise on waves of popular support, achieving immense power, yet their own overconfidence and disregard for counsel can lead to their eventual downfall, taking their nations with them. The wax in these modern tales is not literal, but metaphorical. It is the venture capital that runs out, the public trust that erodes, the market bubble that bursts. The sun is not a celestial body, but the harsh, unforgiving light of reality that ultimately melts away illusion and unsustainable ambition. The story of Icarus serves as a powerful cultural shorthand, a cautionary tale for an age defined by rapid technological advancement and the relentless pursuit of the next big thing. It reminds us that innovation without wisdom is perilous, and that ambition without humility can be self-destructive. The boy who fell from the sky thousands of years ago continues to fly and fall in our boardrooms, our laboratories, and our halls of power, a perpetual warning that the laws of gravity, both literal and metaphorical, apply to us all.